Mr. Ozio.
I am blessed to be here, wow, man. Totally blessed.
I mean, at your age, I understand where you came from.
I'm blessed to wake up on the positive side of the daisies every day, you might say.
Right. That's right. Well, I think we all are to some extent, and I certainly am glad to be here too. And don't have a whole lot of people here tonight, but we're going to do the best we can to help everybody behind the camera as well as the folks here.
We got some people here that we can help out this week on this pond.
They're from out of town, so that'll be good. But this is our free seminars. We do these every 2 weeks at Lake Fork Marina up in the upper room. And 2 weeks from tonight, I need you right back here, if you can be.
Yeah.
And we're going to get a couple more guys because 2 weeks from tonight is our big pre-Christmas seminar where we do basically the biggest single tackle giveaway that any YouTuber does ever.
And that's the night you give me some rods, right?
Not you.
What?
But the people that are sitting out there in the audience get them. But we've done it a couple years in a row now, and it's like last year for sure was in dollar amount of tackle. It was easily the biggest tackle giveaway any social media person's ever done.
Listen, I got somebody sitting right over there that I can talk to. Put the quietus on you, so you better get me a rod.
Listen, we don't need any collusion in here. No collusion. It's football season. We can't be colluding, man.
No collusion.
That's cheating, and we don't like cheaters. Anyway.
No collusion.
Anyway.
All right, let's talk fishing.
So tonight, man, it's kind of a fall to winter transition, I would say, right now is what's going on with Lake Fork and our cold water lakes. We've kind of reached the end of the fall, I would say, for the most part, and we're going into winter here, and we're kind of in between those two. And there's a few things that I like to do on Lake Fork when that's going on. It is one of the tougher times to fish Lake Fork. I mean, it's kind of like the turnover, and then this fall to winter transition is you have the fall bite, which can be good and spurts off and on. But, man, this fall to winter deal, it gets kind of tough for a little while. The good news is once we get past this, it's basically pre-spawn is starting, and it's awesome. But for right now, this fall to winter transition can be a little tough.
Well, and I was on the water the other day, and I mean, the brown bubbles was still everywhere in the area that I was fishing. So anytime that we get these super, super cold nights in a stretch we had last week where, the lows were in the 30s, then that top layer cools down, and what does it do? Sink. And so when it sinks, and it seems like, and we went through this last year, it's an ongoing lake turnover all the way into December. So when that water stabilizes, the coldness, say 48 to 53 degrees, that seems like that all comes to a head and stops, in my opinion.
And I will put one other caveat out there that I've noticed over the last couple of years on Lake Fork for that, churning of the water and anything you want to talk about as far as that goes. October and November is the 2 months where I see what appears to be an abnormal drop in water level. And I know in years past, in October, November, they have pulled water to DFW from the lake. And we've gotten a lot of rain in October, November this year, and the lake's not really coming up. So, again, that tells me that they are pulling water throughout October, November. It seems like it, and I don't know this is not confirmed, but I think that they are pulling water in October, November. And the good news is today is December 2nd. So we should be done, if they go by the schedule they have in the past, which so far they have, we should be done with the water getting pulled out, and that should bring more stability to the water column, which is always good because these fish on Fork live in a very stable environment as far as water level goes. Mm-hmm. And when you get these big rains, it goes up for a day and it comes right back down, or or just jumps up, or they keep pulling it down even inches at a time every day. To these fish in Lake Fork, that's a big change to their environment. So that's part of the reason of, I think, why it has gotten tough even more than it should be for this time of year, and more than it used to be years ago before they pulled that water.
Well, and I used to get a report from Steve Chick, who lives here on the lake, and he had a water data report that he'd email out every month. And for the longest time, every month I'd see that Dallas was pulling about 2 billion gallons a month out of the lake. But strangely enough, that 2 billion gallons only equals 1 inch.
Right.
And which isn't much, which is, to me, is mind-boggling. But,
I don't know the math on that, but that doesn't seem like it adds up. But I mean,
it don't seem like it adds up, but that's what the report says. And then also there's evaporation.
I'm not really a math guy.
You wouldn't think that that evaporation would have its play at this time of the year with everything being cold, but it does have an effect. So that was calculated into that report, and they'd show the water that goes out through the trainer gate at the dam, and it was showing the overall dispersion of water, downstream. So it's a good report to read.
Yeah, if you do. For those out there that are watching it, drive by Lake Fork, you drive behind the dam, you see that water coming out of the dam. That is what they call a rate of flow pipe. So that is something that never turns off. It's always on. They have a downstream obligation to the tributaries downstream from Lake Fork to maintain the same rate of flow that existed prior to the lakes being built. So that little pipe that's shooting out the side of the spillway on the dam there, that will never turn off, guys. That is something that's always on, and that little bitty old pipe is doing almost nothing to the water level on this lake. I mean, it's really not doing anything at all. So don't worry about that. Don't freak out and go, well, the lake's low. Why are they letting water out of that? That's just a normal thing.
Yeah, you can go to USGS and pull up Lake Fork, and then you can pull up the daily chart on it that shows exactly what the lake's doing. This last rain we had, the lake came up 15 inches before it peaked. And so I didn't look at it today to see if all of a sudden it's peaked and turned down. If Dallas is pulling water out of it, then you'll see the curve start to go down the other way.
So we know why it's stuff. Like there's a lot of reasons why it's stuff right now. Just a time of year thing, water level changes, all that good stuff. And the lake being, before we move on, I want to say that the lake being low does not make the lake fish bad. And I think that's something that's a lot of people are thinking. I've heard it from a lot of people this year. The lake doesn't fish very good because it's low. That couldn't be further from the truth. If anything, there are certainly some situations where the lake being low makes the lake fish a lot better, significantly better. And I think we're kind of coming into one of those periods in the colder time of year where the lake being low is going to make it fish more predictable. It's going to make the groups of fish bigger because there's the same amount of fish and less amount of water. So there is things that you can do to take advantage of the lake being low and make it actually fish better. That being said, David, how the heck do you go about catching a fish out there right now?
Okay, so the other day I got out here and I was mainly looking on hard structure, looking for barfish. At this time of the year...
What type of structure are we talking about?
Road beds, the edges of bridges, even, some humps. I looked at some humps and some real sharp, deep points.
When you say the edges of bridges, are we talking riprap on existing bridges or
underwater bridges?
Thank you. Okay.
Good point. Underwater bridges. And what I've found over time is that those underwater bridges, those fish don't really get on the bridge as much like they do in the summer as they would get on the sides of the bridge or where the road meets the bridge. And I went and checked
that seems to be a deal, right?
Several places the other day with that, and I talked to Billy about this today. We talked on the phone, and I said the most unusual thing about this whole day was that I covered a lot of water, and I did not see hardly a barfish, not on any roadbed, which is to me rare, very rare.
Do you think that some of the roadbeds that we traditionally always go look for them on and find them on are not holding them because of the change in depth and they're on different depth structure?
Well, I had this one road bed. I went all the way from the shallow part of the road bed was 10 foot. I went all the way out to 24 feet and did not see a barfish. Now, I hit another road bed, though, that had the same structure, shallow, and then it went out to even deeper. And in 22 foot of water, in that in particular road bed, there was a ton of barfish right there. We fished it and worked it and worked it and worked it and never got a bite on it. And I even tried to catch the barfish just to see if I could get them turned on.
Yeah, you said some Japanese thing or something.
I use a little sabiki rig. That's a saltwater.
Man, I can't even spell that.
That's a saltwater rig that has has feathers on it. And when you throw that thing down there, usually those barfish will jump on that thing immediately. Yeah. And I could not get them to bite that. Now, what I didn't try was a 3/8 ounce spoon with a white feather on the back of it on a little small hook. And that, if you can just get those things fired up and you start catching some of them, a lot of times, if those bigger bass that are setting off the side of the road, and I've seen this happen so many times, especially now with Active Target, you can see those big fish come up. It does something to those barfish to get them going, and then these big fish will come up and they'll start to feed.
Same thing. I've done it on guide trips hundreds of times probably, or dozens anyway for sure, where those yellow bass will be up there, and I'll get my customers throwing an Alabama rig, a Carolina rig, a jig, or whatever, and I'll start throwing a jigging spoon and get to catching those barfish. And it is when you fire those barfish and they start biting, it like brings the attention from the bass, and then they show up. And this is kind of a one at a time deal, one or two at a time. I mean, it's not like you get those barfish going and you're going to sit there and catch a whole school of bass. I mean, I guess that could happen, but in general, in my experience, that's a deal where you get those barfish fired up and then you'll get a bite or maybe a second bite. And then it'll kind of fade away, and then you got to kind of refire them again and let them regather. And sometimes, it's good to have some spots rotating. But kind of like you were saying, a lot of the old familiar spots just don't really have them on them this year. I've found a couple of road beds that have them, but they are like out of the way stuff that I haven't fished in the past that are kind of new stuff that I've discovered this year in looking for fish because they weren't where I thought they would be. It has set up differently, man. There's definitely some different spots. And what I will say, if you guys are coming to Lake Fork and you want to find out where some of these new fall spots are or late fall spots are that I've been finding, then you can go check the Fish Life app and the premium package for Lake Fork and Fish Life, L-Y-F-E, the life is spelled with a Y. But we're going to actually, I'm going to update those tomorrow. So I'll have fresh spots on there of the places that I've been finding some fish that traditionally in the past, I haven't even fished these areas. These are just brand new ones. Mm-hmm. So.
And also, too, what I noticed that day, too, was a lot of you could see a lot of these fish, some of these fish in some of these places, they were suspended. And so whenever you get into that situation right there, I had the fishing magician with me that day, and we were covering a lot of water out here, and I did not have a spoon tied on. Matter of fact, I didn't even have them in the boat. They were in the back of my Suburban. But I really, when I saw that, I said, I need to throw one of those in here, but I just didn't have one. We only stayed on the water about 5 hours, and but several of the places that we went to, I could see arcs that were up, halfway between the surface and 22 foot, and so it's good to have one of those tied on.
Yeah, no doubt. One thing that I like to keep an eye out for is kind of some out of the way stuff. Is deep water flats that are close to main lake points. So main lake points are good a lot of time of the year. But for whatever reason, this time of year, I found that these fish tend to be on flat structures. So roadbeds are always real good because it's a long, flat piece of ground. And also, there are a few out here on this lake. If you look hard enough on Navionics, you can find them. Main lake points, and then out beside them, there'll be like a deep water flat that's like 20 foot deep or 23 foot deep. And a lot of times, these bass and yellow bass and all that will just kind of drift out onto that flat and kind of hang out in there and can be caught out off the structure. In the summertime, if they're out off the structure, I kind of leave them alone. Mm-hmm. I want to see them on the point, on the hump, whatever. But this is a time of year where if they're out on that flat, they seem to still kind of eat. Now, one thing that is challenging is some of these deep water flats are massive. They're huge. And so those fish can move and wander around on you, and that's where having the best electronics really helps you now with live sonar and Humminbird 360. You can kind of chase those fish around that flat a lot better than we used to. You sit there and catch them for a while, then they quit biting, and you have to get back down there and idle and look around for them and hope you found them again idling, and then go catch you a couple more, and it was a lot harder. Now you just stay on your trolling motor and chase them with that live sonar or that 360. It's a lot easier now.
I was telling these gentlemen here that usually at this time of the year, especially when we have sun, you can run some bank lines, even with the red rattle trap. And but I've found over the years that that's not even worth tackling until 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Correct.
And then run it till really late, getting close to dark, and you actually have a chance to tackle some good fish.
For right now. Now we get a little later, we start getting into pre-spawn. That deal plays all day.
Yes, but we still got 2 months before that rolls. Really, month and a half.
New Year's Day is when I start looking for it.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
I figured it would roll.
But we can talk about that.
I would think it would roll through January too. I mean, it all depends too how cold the water is. Yeah. What the weather time frame has been, and you look at the past 2 or 3 years we've had here. Wow, what a difference every year's been. We've had like the major ice storm, in early February,
year before last,
and then we've had some warmer winters, and so you just basically have to take that information that you learn from things like this right here, and then keep them in the noggin and apply them based off of when you get out there and see what the water temperatures are, and then say, okay, so I've got some 48 to 52 degree water in the afternoon. If we get some sun out there beaming down on it, that top layer warms shallow, and then those bigger fish, I've seen it happen too many times. You find a point or whatever the case, and say at the mouth of a cove or a secondary point, it's well worth throwing a 3/4 ounce rattle trap up there.
Now, another way for right now to catch them, we talk, so offshore structures, what we've been talking about, road beds, deep water flats, points, stuff like that. And I do think that, a variety of spoons from a little jigging spoon up to a flutter spoon, an Alabama rig, and maybe a Carolina rig, that's kind of the way to go in those areas, in my opinion. But another way that you can catch them right now, one way that's real easy is bridges, and it's real popular. I mean, we did a seminar on this a couple seminars ago or something like a month ago, and those bridges, they've gotten bounded, and so those fish have gotten a little harder to catch around some of those bridges. And when I say around those bridges, I mean primarily the bridges that are in the creek arms, okay? Like, we got our 3 creeks right here. You got Birch. You got, I think you can still get to the Running Creek Bridge. And even the 2946 bridge in some ways kind of functions similar. But there's several of them out here. But is those fish move in and out of these creeks, right? So they go. We all know in fall they move a lot. Like they'll travel up and down the creek. They'll go to the back of the creek, come back out, all that stuff. Well, a lot of those fish that have been in the backs of the creeks are coming back out now this time of year, right? They're coming back out to the main lake. As they do that, when they go through these bridges, it funnels them down and it puts a pinch point on them. And it's also a great place for them to stop and feed because we all know, man, every crappie fisherman knows, especially, there's always bait fish around those bridge pilings. Always, always, always bait fish around those bridge pilings. So those bass will stop and just eat for as long as they see fit around those bridges, and they'll get gathered up there at times, and you can catch them there. Primarily, I use an Alabama rig and a jerk bait. A jerk bait can be really good around those bridges and just the corners of the aprons where it funnels into that pinch point and then the actual bridge piling. Come on in, brother.
Even a 6XD or an 8XD crankbait type of thing.
And there's times when I'll throw, prepare yourself here,
drop shot,
a little shaky head or a drop shot.
You came on
around those corners of those bridge aprons,
right.
Specifically. If it's just really calm day and I'm throwing that 8-rig jerkbait, I can't get in the bite, but I'm seeing fish on my electronics, then that is when I'll resort to the finesse plastic deal, either a little shaky head or a lightweight drop shot, and actually truly finesse fish for them really, really slow. And that'll usually get those fish around the bridges to bite. And that's a really good way to get right in a hurry. That's a way this time of year when it's really tough where you can pull up on one of those bridges at the right time and you might catch 5 or 10 or however many. I mean, it can be a lot sometimes, and can catch some of the biggest fish in the lake can be caught around that structure this time of year. And then the other thing to do that's kind of hard to do, if I'm being honest, I mean, you got to be pretty serious about fishing and have some time in the boat and be pretty fundamentally sound. But we all saw Patrick Walters at the end of November 2 years ago, and he introduced pretty much the whole bass fishing world for the most part to live sonar fishing. And it was the end of November on Lake Fork, using live sonar in mid-depth to even sometimes shallow timber for the most part, in just patches of main lake timber. It didn't even have to be in a creek. It didn't have to be around structure. It was just patches of main lake timber that he was hitting, and wherever he would find fish in that timber, he could catch them using that live sonar. So if you are a live sonar guy, now is the time to be at Lake Fork, because it sets up better for that right now than it does any other time of year. So if that's your thing, then the month of December is the month to be here, because there is a lot. And I mean, I don't have very many guide customers that can handle that. They can really cast that accurately, and
you've got to have skills. Your skill set's got to be really good to play that game.
Ever tried to fish with live sonar? For those that say, "Well, that's like cheating and it's easy," you ain't doing it. Like you're not the one that's doing it,
right?
Because it's a challenge for me, Dave. I mean, I've tried to do it a little bit here and there, and I'll be honest, I'm not very good at it at all. But I can see those fish in there with live sonar. Now, keeping the fish on my screen, keeping my bait on the screen, whole different ball game. Getting the fish react, that's where it gets difficult. But there is an abundance of fish in some of these stretches of main lake timber. And if you have live, do y'all have live sonar? No? Okay. Well, so not doing y'all any good, but for any of those behind the camera that are coming, it's there to be had right now. And it's probably the best way to stay consistent day to day is to live sonar fish. But it takes the technology, so that costs money. If you don't have that, you kind of out of luck on it. And it takes a whole lot of skill to execute on it.
The skill, the casting skill and everything too. But also the key factor to go along with that is the right day. Meaning that you need very little wind. And when Patrick Walters won that tournament, they had 4 days of zero wind.
Yes.
And which is rare for that time of the year. And it was a perfect storm for him, and I followed him around and watched what he was doing on one of the days, and I saw all the places that he was going to, and he just had isolated clumps of trees that he'd pull up there, and he's using the active target or
I think he was on the Garmin one.
The Garmin and LiveScope, and then he would throw that, and he had 2 or 3 different, you talked to him after, he had jerk baits, 2 or 3 different depth diving jerk baits, and when he'd see those fish down there on the sides of the trees, he could look at them and then pick up the right jerk bait and then run it down there. And I sat there not very far away from him, and I'm saying, I could hear him. He's looking at it. He's looking at it. He's looking at it, and he'd have his rod like this, and he's waiting, and all of a sudden, boom! He said he's got it, and he'd watch the fish eat it.
What he actually would do is he would take that jerk bait and work it real fast.
Yep.
I mean, almost just reeling it in, just working it, twitching it, reeling it all at the same time. And when a fish would react to that, when it would come out off a tree and come look at his jerkbait, it would follow it a little bit for a second. He would stop, and then he'd go to doing this real. Like now, that fish is behind the bait, staring at it, or kind of. And what they'll do, you'll see them on the live sonar. They'll flash at it, right? Now he would just pause that bait in place. It would suspend because it's a spinning jerkbait. And he would just do little subtle, light twitches. I mean, very light twitches, and then a lot of times that fish would hook up.
I watched him finesse them,
and he caught fish. I mean, you had arguably the best field of anglers in the world. I mean, maybe Bass Pro Tour, we could have that debate another time, but for sure, 80 or 90 of the best 200 anglers on earth were on this lake at the same time he was, on the same day in the same conditions. And he literally smashed, I think he doubled the record for margin of victory.
Yeah.
That's how much better he caught fish on this lake in these conditions than everybody else by using live sonars. That tells you how much more consistently effective it can be. But like David said, the wind can kill it. I was actually supposed to go out here tomorrow with one of the better live sonar fishermen probably on earth. And a guy that's fishing the Bassmaster Elite Series. Me and him were supposed to go out here tomorrow, and we were going to try and do some live sonar stuff on Fork. And I was looking forward to it and excited about it because I need to learn how to do that better, and it's something that I need to improve on. But we've got sustained winds around 15, even up to 20 miles an hour tomorrow. So we actually rescheduled and reset it. We had another date kind of that we were looking at anyway here in a couple more weeks. So we're actually not going to go because of the wind. So it is a very big deterrent on live sonar.
But it was also, too, in that event, and that's what I was telling you guys, that later in the day, he bailed off those trees, and then he got on some main lake points, or inside some main lake points, and he was still throwing that jerkbait, but he was looking at them on the live sonar, and he caught a 6-pounder. He caught some 4-pounders.
Don't get too excited about telling what structure he was on, because I know Patrick personally, and I've talked to him plenty of times about that event. He wasn't on anything. He literally went down to the main lake and was just following fish.
Yeah,
he was chasing fish with his. Now he's good enough with that life sonar to do that, but he was
on the main lake point.
He would
watched him
cruise along and find one, and then he would chase it wherever it would go.
Yep.
He would just follow it and just.
And
keep
I've done that
throwing
before on Sam Rayburn with mine, and I mean it was the damnedest thing, man. I had this one fishing, and I'm going on the trolling motor. And I'm throwing a crankbait at it. And every time I'd land that crankbait, I'm through, and it would go right behind him every single time, and that fish was just moving on, just going on down that drain.
You remember on the fourth day, me and you were actually in the boat together doing coverage for that tournament, and on the fourth day, he was near those main lake points, but I don't know if you remember when he finished up, he was actually in that just bottomed out drain in between those 2 points.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
He was just out in the middle of nowhere, man. He just chased them fish into that drain and followed them around.
But you can find those fish too in those places with your regular 2D sonar. When you idle through places like that, and like I said, those fish that I told you about that you see suspended, there you go. I mean, there's a tactic. And so when you see those suspended fish, then you can have that jerkbait tied on, and then you can circle back and turn that live scope on, and then look at it and start trying to pick off those fish. That's why we throw spoons at them a lot of times, or even a Magnum Fluke with about a 7 or an 8/0 hook on it, and then especially when we're using the active target, I can throw it up there and I can watch that bait float down, and especially if I see that fish moving, try to get his attention and then reel it in, make another cast.
I want to try to help these two guys specifically because I know they're here from a long ways out of town. Mm-hmm. What kind of electronics do y'all have? Are y'all using?
Just have Lowrance, it's a HDS, the live, but it's
so like down scan, side scan, sonar.
Yes, sir.
Typical. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So no Humminbird 360, no live sonar, just where we were 3 or 4 years ago. That's what you
Yes,
got.
sir.
Okay. So, for y'all right now, I really think your best bet on Lake Fork, number one would be, I think bridges are worth your time. And, you can run by there, you can fish them fairly quickly, see if there's some fish on them. But the corners of the bridge aprons and the pilings, I think is a very good way for you to spend your time out here with primarily a jerkbait Alabama rig. And then if you find some fish, maybe slow down with some finesse stuff. But the other main thing is to graph road beds, like we were talking about earlier, road beds and points, and even out off the sides of some of those points. graft some of that offshore structure. And when you find an abundance of life, I will tell you this time of year they will get mixed up. So even if it doesn't look like bass, it looks like just yellow bass or just white bass, it's worth your time to actually sit there and try to figure it out and make some casts a lot of times, because there will be some green fish mixed in with those other species a lot of times. So that would be the two kind of ways. And a spoon, like we said earlier on, that would probably be your best bet. And if nothing else, you can go out there and have get you a bunch of bites and fights off everything with stripes on it out there between white bass and barfish and all that. But that to me would be y'all's best bet to have success with the electronics you're dealing with. Because I mean, just to go along and fish for suspended fish in timber without live sonar is such a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
With how much timber is on this lake. I think that would be kind of chasing your tail if I was to suggest that to you.
Now, in years past, here, especially when the lake was this low or even lower, and I've been looking at this now for the past month, off and on, and I haven't seen them there yet, but the water didn't get cold enough. At the mouths of these main creeks, out in the very almost to the main lake, but in maybe 100, 200 yards, got to graphing around there, out there, places where creeks meander through that coming out to the main lake. And when the water in years past was down maybe even a foot and a half lower than it is now, that's why I was kind of aggravated that this rain brought it up to what it did.
Yeah. Everybody from the outside looking in is wanting Fork to come up and get
I wanted
full.
to go down.
And us guys that work here every day are like, God, keep going down. Keep going down.
I
man.
want it to go down 2 more feet, because what happens is all those fish move out into that range at the mouths of these creeks.
Just gathers them.
And they gather out there, and then I'm telling you, go out there, and even on a 2D sonar, when you're idling back and forth in those areas, and you'll drop off, say you got a little peninsula where a creek wraps around out in the very middle of this big cove, all right, and it goes back a pretty good ways. I'm talking, Ray Branch or Wolf or Dale or any of these places.
Board Tree, pick a creek.
Board Tree, a bigger creek like that.
Board Tree's a great one because
And
it's
then,
relatively shallow
and you get
enough.
out there in the middle of that thing and you idle back and forth and you look at your graph where that creek runs, and there's a point in the creek where the creek makes a bend. You graph over that thing. A lot of times, if that water's not any deeper, I would say, than 20 feet right there on that spot, a lot of times I've seen those fish just stack up on those places right there and go in and throw a Carolina rig or a drop shot or a shaky head on them and just absolutely work on them. And I had that, a bunch of times now. I've been looking at that now for the past month, but the water temps were, started off when I was looking in the low 60s, then up in the high 50s, closer, and I never ever got it down to where it was 52, 53, 54,
It'll get there soon.
where I want it, to be able to see if those fish moved out there and ganged up. And so that's something that if you've got time and you got a day where you're just out scouting around, that is something you need to go into some of these big wide body creeks and graph around out there at the mouth of it and look at it and see what you can spot.
Do you guys have any questions about Fork or anything right now? Nothing
Feel
you
free.
think
This
of?
is the time to ask a question.
Soaking it up.
If you think of something later, just pop it out there, because I'm about to move on to a little different topic here. There is something else you can do. There's something else you can do to enjoy some great fishing in East Texas right now. And I've been mentioning it some on some videos and stuff. But there's a place you can go that ain't on Lake Fork. There's a place you can go near here where it's spring in the water. Yeah, it is pre-spawn to spawn fishing. There's fish on beds. You can literally see them on beds spawning. And
we caught 81 there last Monday.
It is our power plant heated lakes, and there's 3 of them in East Texas. There's Martin Creek and Brandy Branch are south of Longview, and they're right next to each other. And then Welsh is, how far is Welsh from Fork? Because I drive it from my
55
house.
miles.
So it's about an hour from Fork,
Yeah.
east of here. And it is, all 3 of them are full of hydrilla grass, and they have these power plants running where they're running that water through that plant, and then it kicks that water back in the lake, and it's heated. And it rises the water temp in the whole lake. Well, those fish, because of the elevated water temp, spawn during the coldest time of year. So they're just starting to spawn right now. And you've got, they're fat, they're healthy, they're mean, they're strong, and they're biting like real good. So I know y'all are here from out of town. If Fork's kicking your butt and you just want to go get your line stretched, from here, since y'all are staying here at the lake, the closest one would be Lake Welsh. And we actually just put a video out this past week that it was the first day I'd been there this winter, and it was, I don't know how many we caught in the video, but we caught, I know not every fish we caught was in the video. We caught like 30 something fish that day, and we probably had 23, 24 pounds on our best 5. So we caught some big ones. Those lakes, it's super easy. I mean, it's just springtime. You can literally take a Cinco around to any grass flat on them and catch fish. If you really want to try and target bigger fish, you can throw swim baits, you can throw swim jigs. Some days they'll bite a chatterbait. You can basically go out there and fish. You can get topwater bites. I mean, you'll be out there fishing along and just pitching a Cinco up around the grass around the bank or something, and then out in the middle of the creek, they'll come up schooling. The ones that are staging, getting ready to spawn, will come up schooling on chat out in the middle of the creek. You can reach over and fire topwater in there and get bit. Like it's
They'll bite a frog in Martin Creek.
It's springtime.
I just fished it this morning.
What's that?
Welsh.
Welsh.
For 4 hours from
Yeah.
8 to 1, and the coldest water I saw was about 63, and I was on a peninsula where it comes out, and the school of bait was just for 3
Yeah.
hours nonstop. I just had spot lock, and just wave after wave of fish kept coming
Yeah.
through,
Yeah.
and it was 69.2 degrees.
Yeah.
Where that water was coming out of the plant. The wind was blowing out of the south, so it was blowing it up the lake, and I was just sitting on this point and just
I already know the point you were setting.
Come on.
You gave up too much info.
and it was
That's
just
whole buzzard number 1. He can find you spot.
I
now.
know, right?
yeah, and it was just
I know
I didn't
the
catch
point.
any giant fish, but I caught fish. And
Yeah, I mean, we didn't catch any real big giants, but that day we were on Welsh, we caught fish up to 4 or 5, probably 5 and change on our biggest one, and had several in that 4 to 5 pound range, and then on Martin Creek, went there last week for a day. It was the only day I've been to Martin Creek, and I mean, our biggest fish that day was a big one. It was about 7 pounds, and I think we caught it. We were filming, we caught it 6 on camera, but then after we did that, we kind of got to looking at it and thinking, man, that fish is definitely bigger than 6 pounds. It's probably about 7 or so. But either way, it was a really big fish. And it's just fun, man. Like, over there at Martin Creek, we're throwing a frog in a swim jig. Right? Like, how much fun is that,
Yeah.
And then we're throwing on Welsh, we're throwing swim jigs and, Cincos to catch numbers if you want to. And the guy I had with me on Welsh wanted to catch a bunch, so he's throwing a Cinco. But other than that, you're throwing a swim jig and a chatterbait and a swim bait, and it's spring. In those power plant lakes, it is absolutely March 20th, to those fish. So it's unbelievable.
If the conditions are right here, I mean, for certain things like we were talking about with these road beds or with these certain areas where these fish will gang up, like I was telling you about in those creeks, stuff like that, and I'll scout prior to a trip, and if that's not lined up, then we'll go for one of those places.
To speak to how good those lakes are fishing, I see a lot more fishing guides on the power plant lakes right now than I do on Lake Fork. You know what I'm saying? Like guys that are trying to take people and make them happy by the fish they catch for a living. There's a whole lot more of them on power plant lakes right now, day to day, than there is on Fork. And when you're out here every day like we are, you see and we all know each other's boats and trucks and trailers, and so you see the guys at the ramps, and you cross them running by on the lake. We all know when each other's out here for the most part, and there's a whole lot more of them fishing other lakes than there are.
Well,
fishing
also
Fork.
too, and there's 2 lakes that have vegetation in them.
Yeah.
That aren't very far from here. 2 lakes that, even with the water being 53, 55 degrees, throwing a chatterbait, throwing a rattle trap on around that grass, on this vegetation on those lakes, I mean, you can catch a bag of giants doing that at this time of the year with that pattern alone, just because of the vegetation.
One of those lakes they're going to, there ain't a whole lot of big. It's a lot of fish, but to me, it's even worse than Welsh as far as size.
Oh, really?
That's why I went there early in the fall and had a couple of decent days with size, but for the most part, I went there several times, and it was like after 3 or 4 trips of nothing but babies, man, I quit going there. Like it was a lot, but it was all. It was nothing but babies for a while, so I quit going to that one. And I know a lot of guys been going there too.
It depends on the client. It totally depends on the client. I had 2 older fellas 2 weeks ago.
That may be my biggest fault as a fishing guide is I'm kind of like, listen, I'm going to do what I do, and I hope y'all enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to go fish the way I want to fish, and I hope you guys, because we're going for 5 big ones. Like, that's what we're trying to catch. Now, if we catch a bunch, great.
These
But-
2 old fellas, they caught 105, and they just had the time of their life.
Yep.
And I did all the little fish, and they won't stop.
I got to say, I'm coming more around to your line of thinking on some of that the older I get, right? Like, the older I get, the more I realize, like, you know what?
Listen,
I've never had anybody get upset. Like, I've never seen anybody that's mad or even thinking about any problems that may be going on in their life when there's a fish on their line. Whether it's a baby or a big one, nobody's complaining when there's a fish on their line. Like, I've never seen that in all my years.
My number one goal is the client. I mean, I want to get them bit, and if it's here, and I know that I can have a 20 or a 30 fish day here, and I have a good chance here to catch a giant, and I'm always going to go that way first.
More percentage of bigger fish
First,
here, for sure.
even if we only have a 15 fish day, if they have a 7 or an 8 pounder in mixed into that, then it's pretty well mission accomplished. They got to work pretty good in order to get that. But like in the spring this past year, we were catching 30 to 35 a day, and every day we had fish over 7 pounds every single day. And so that was in April and early May. So, I mean, it just depends, number one, on the skill set. I usually quiz the clients on skill set, see what they can do. I have a lot of people that we were flipping wood in one particular lake, and they just didn't have the skills to do that. And so you have to factor that in, too. Yeah. And then, like I have Monday, I've got a group Monday, and they can't use anything but left-handed reels. And so I was just before I came over here, I was getting all that rigged up for them with left-handed equipment. So you got to just double-check all that, find out what they're good at, what they're not good at, and then I usually will try to match their skills to one of the lakes around here to where they can have the best time they can have.
Yeah, I joke around about it, but so hopefully I don't run my business, but I actually do. I mean, that's one of the questions you have to ask when you're guiding. You have to ask every person before you go out. A day or two, you talk to them a day or two before you go out, and you got to ask them. The most important thing to ask them is, what do you want out of the trip? You just want to have a good day of fishing. You want to learn something. You want to target giant. Some guys don't care if they catch a fish. They want to learn about electronics. Some guys want to target one big bite. And they want to come to Fork. And to be honest with you, there is times and there is other lakes in East Texas where targeting one big bite can be done more effectively on other bodies of water than Fork. Fork is not the greatest lake on earth every single day. It's not. No lake is. To be fair, no lake is. Most of the time, for big fish, it's going to be Fork. Yep. Sometimes it's other places. And there are plenty of guys that I get, maybe not quite as many as Dave, but I do get guys that are, novice. And the reality of Lake Fork is it's not always, most of the time, I would venture to say the majority of the time, Lake Fork is not the place to take somebody that is novice to get them some bites. If you got a guy that doesn't have experience and he just wants to get bit and have fun catching fish, there are several of the lakes in East Texas, we're very blessed, that are going to offer a better opportunity for a novice angler to catch a lot of fish than Fork does most days.
Right. Especially if they're chunking wine people where they can advance a bait, cast it. They don't have much, and they're not actually, I've had guys before and women too that they're not very good at finessing, like even throwing a Cinco and working it. They didn't even know when they were getting a bite a lot of times. And I factor that in. Hey, I'm not holding anything against them. I want to teach them what they're looking for, mostly. But also, too, I want to play to the strength, which is they can advance it, whether it's with a spinner rod, and then teach them how to hold the rod down and then get the speed right. And so that whether it's a swim bait, whether it's a chatterbait, whether it's a swim jig, or whatever the case. And then and when they get the rod knocked out of their hand, I mean, that's what they're after. And so it just depends on where that's going to be. That's why I throw a drop shot a lot, because certain times of the year here, I mean, we can have 20 to 40 fish days on a drop shot. That is the most versatile weapon there is in the bag. I mean, whether we're fishing in 25, 30 foot of water or whether we're throwing it up in this deep of water, I mean, it catches them, man. That's a great tool. I've been on him for lifetime about a drop shot. He won't throw a drop shot. And
I will.
You have been breaking down here lately.
I will throw it when I absolutely have to. I just don't.
He is a big fish commander.
I do like to
he knows how to go for big fish. He knows what to look for big fish. People hire him to go out and catch their personal best. And I mean, there's a lot of guides out here that's what they do, and they'll go to every extreme possible. I mean, you'll be throwing a giant crankbait, Alabama rig. I mean, big jigs.
But to be fair, when you do that, there's days where I come back to the ramp with my head hung low, and you've caught 25. I mean, that's part of fishing like that. Is I'm not, and I tell people this all the time on the phone when they're talking to me about booking or whatever on email. I tell them, look, if you want to go get the most amount of bites you can get, man, I can send you some guys. Like I can give you some numbers of guys that are probably going to get you more bites than I will. But if you want to go out and catch the best 5 bag you can or try to target bigger fish, that's how I fished before I started guiding. It was what was in my mind and what I wanted to do before I started guiding. And so that's what I did when I started guiding, and it's worked, and I built a business off of it. And so the majority of the people that I have are repeat customers at this point, and those people know what they're getting. We're going for broke a little bit, I don't do it quite as extreme as some guys do. I'm I like to think I blend it in and have a balance to it, but for sure, there's definitely usually bigger line and bigger baits on my deck than there is on David's most days.
And I attack it slightly different. I'll feel the customer out.
And to be fair to you, Dave, you catch a lot of big ones on that little stuff too.
Exactly,
yeah.
And we do. But we'll target some like what he does for 30% of the day. And if I already know that's a little bit more of a challenge, and then we'll give it a good college try. And then I said, let's go try to just get some bites, and they're all in for it now. A pattern coming up here in late December and January is something that he'll do a lot, and especially with this lake level the way that it is right now, the chance to go out and throw a jig and catch a double digit
is coming.
You're not going to get very many bites, but there is a chance that you could latch on to the monster of a lifetime. And that pattern, if you can catch a day where the wind's not howling, plays really, really good. You'll have to flip 5 million times.
We can do it when the wind's blowing too. You just got to use a bigger jig.
Bigger jig, but there's also certain areas. But there's certain patterns that'll work on, and I'm telling you, it's worth the time to get 3 bites, and a lot of times they'll all be over 7 pounds.
I'll tell you the truth of the matter. Well, before I answer that, I want to throw this one thing in there. Me and David talking about our different fishing styles. If you look at any professional level tournament, the top 5 guys, they're not all doing the same thing. It's almost, it'd be very rare that all 5 were doing the same thing. And those guys are all some of the best in the world, and they're doing different stuff. And a lot of times you have 5 guys doing 5 different things, So really this game, and it's cliche to say this, but it's real, man. It's very real. The most important thing in bass fishing is to have confidence in what you're doing. David has confidence in a drop shot. He has a lot of confidence in it. He's done it. He's cashed checks on it over the years. It's been good to him. When he throws that drop shot out there, he's throwing it out there expecting a bite. And that affects the way that he fishes that drop shot. When I throw a drop shot out there, I'm like, dude, this sucks. And that affects the way that I fish that drop shot. Now, when I throw a bait this big out there, I'm like, dude, if I get one, it's going to be her. And it affects the same thing. If he throws a bait out there, he's like, dude, I'm never going to get a bite on this. And it's going to affect all that. The confidence in how you fish a bait is so important. And the reason why it's so important is because none of us realize how many times a day when we're bass fishing that our bait is sitting here and a bass is sitting here.
Looking at it.
We don't know that. Or, we reel a spinner bait or a crankbait, whatever, reel it right by one. You don't know. And if you are not confident in that bait and it affects the way you fish it, there's a chance that you're going to miss bites. Because if I'm confident in a crankbait, I'm feeling for everything I can to deflect it off of, I'm making the most. And that's going to bring a higher percentage of the day. When I bounce that crankbait off something hard, right in front of that fish, he's going to react. Versus if I'm just like this and not really paying attention, I'm going to miss chances to get bites because I didn't fish that bait correctly because I didn't have confidence in it. Does that make sense what I'm saying? It's really important.
Absolutely.
Now, the jig deal is coming. And I do want to see it get a little bit colder. In fact, the colder it gets, the better the jig deal will get.
Absolutely.
And I will say this, last year the lake they pulled it down to 6 foot low in the middle of December. So we're essentially in the same place this year as we were last year. So once we get on into New Year's Day, it's about the time, or even the end of December, we'll start doing it. But for sure in the month of January and the first half of February, it's going to be an average of about 6 to 8 bites a day. But it will also be an average, like almost a minimum of a 25-pound best 5 bag every day. So you're only going to get 6 to 8 bites in the boat per day, but 5 of those are going to be 4 or 5 pounds or bigger. And sometimes it's on up to 30, 35 pounds. Sometimes it's, 7, 8, 9, 10 pound bass. It's some huge ones that set up in those creek channels that eat that jig. But it's with the lake being low like it is very consistent. I mean, extremely consistent around here in January and early February, that pre-spawn period on that creek channel bend jig deal. It's very consistent.
It's a wicked pattern.
It's a very good time to come learn how to catch fish when a lot of guys don't catch fish. Because if you learn the little subtle differences in this creek bend versus that creek bend, and this tree stump versus that tree stump, if you learn those differences, you go from a dude that catches 30 pounds a day on average, or 28, 27 pounds a day on average, versus a guy that comes out here and can't hardly get a bite. It's literally, if we had tournaments that time of year and we could weigh our slot fish, you would have good fishermen that would come in with 0. And then you'd have guys come in with 30 pounds a day. And that, learning that jig bite when the lake's low is the difference in that, in my opinion.
And he said the key thing,
Little details.
getting the confidence in it is back, God dog, 30, 35 years ago, was one of my mentors. When we were flipping grass at Sam Rayburn, and I'd never really done that much, but he says, what you need to do, he said, son, he called me son, he said, you need to tie
Boy, that was a long time ago if he's calling you
tie on 3 jigs, and he says, get out there and don't have anything else on the deck but these jigs, that's all. And he said, you go out and spend every single day with those jigs. And he said, and what'll happen is I think what he was after was that you'll start getting enough bites that the confidence will all of a sudden turn the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And with the drop shot, I have a lot of clients that get in the boat, and when I hand them that rod, a lot of times, because I'm looking just to get them a bite, they've never used it before, well, they would rather throw a Texas rig or something that they're used to. That's their confidence. One in particular case, one time, I had a guy in the fall, late fall, and we were catching them on boat docks. And so I had a drop shot rig. I gave him that. Well, he made 3 pitches with it, and he wanted a Texas rig. So I rigged him up a Texas rig, and so we're going down these boat docks. I had him 10-0 with a 7.5 pounder. And I mean, he just couldn't believe it. It was just me and him. And I said, you got to pick this thing up. I'm telling you, it what that bait does underneath there and how it looks natural. I mean, sometimes that's what that fish want. And so he picked it up. Finally, he caught a 6. He caught a 4. Caught a couple other good ones. I've taken him out several times since then, and now the guy won't put anything else in his hand but a drop shot. And that's how he's won some tournaments here, some stringer tournaments. He's won, where when we're targeting unders. I like to fish the stringer tournaments here. And
when you're fishing for under the slot,
when you're going for under the slots, I'm looking for a 10 or 11 pound bag. Man, that thing is a monster. It's a monster.
Yeah. No, it's funny you said that guy told you that about a jig. It actually hadn't. I haven't been a big time jig fisherman my whole life. I fished my whole life, but a jig was a deal that honestly it was kind of my nemesis for a long time. In fact, it was probably only 9 or 10 years ago that I actually, in my head, was like, I know, like I've seen Denny Brower all these years catch all these big fish on a jig. I know that in the bass fishing world, everybody knows a jig is a big fish bait. You get big bites on it. I'm a big fish guy, especially that time. It's long form guiding. Like I'm a big fish guy, like I want to catch big ones. So I just made up my mind. I was like, man, I'm going to learn how to fish a jig. So one year, I had a little 17-foot glass, old 93 model fiberglass bass boat, and I took everything out of my boat. I did. I legitimately took everything out of my boat, tackle-wise, except for 3 rods, a box full of jigs, and a box full of trailers. And I left from Thanksgiving to Valentine's Day. There was nothing in my boat but that. And what the ironic part is, that Thanksgiving Day, I had about 5 or 6 hours that morning to fish before Thanksgiving festivities that year. And so I went out that first morning. And keep in mind, I've caught a few fish here and there on a jig, but it has been I'll throw it for a little while, then I'll pick up a Texas rig. Or you know what I mean? Like, I just never could get any confidence in it. It's kind of my nemesis. The first morning that all I had was a jig in my boat, I caught 6 fish in 6 hours on a jig. Now, you tell me having confidence don't affect the way you fish. I fished a jig off and on all my life. I ain't never caught 6 fish, maybe 6 fish in my life on a jig. Yeah. The first morning when I don't have any choice but to fish it, and I'm fishing it hard and fishing it with the intent of getting a bite, I catch 6 in 6 hours. And 6 in 6 hours isn't that great. It's not. It wasn't anything to get super excited about.
Well, other than Thanksgiving, though, and that's turnover. That's not exactly when the lake's real easy.
Other than, for me, it was a huge deal because I had never caught that many fish on a jig or even close to it. And it started from there. And then that winter it progressed and got better and better and better. But just that first morning, with me having no more or less jig knowledge than I had for my whole life, right? Nothing's changed. I just don't have a choice but to fish this with confidence. That alone made me catch fish 100 times more better than I did without.
And
Before.
the continuous catching, because it wasn't just like a one-off deal where you're
Yeah.
like, man, maybe that was just a fluke
Yeah,
deal.
that's what I mean. Like, it was just
and you're like, hey,
the fact that my mindset was different about fishing that jig was the only thing that was different that day, and I had completely different results than I'd had in my whole life. And from that point on, after that winter, a jig has been like I'll try to even when they're not biting a jig, I'll go try to fish it in the winter now because I love it so much.
Well, you got to fish it too in the right area, and that was the thing that I didn't have any confidence in a jig back then either because I didn't know exactly where to throw
me
it.
neither. I was
and
throwing it
so
everywhere.
when I learned that at Rayburn and that stretch of time where I was doing nothing but a jig, and then learning where to place it in grass, then you started to learn about drains and corners of drains and points or certain types of tapers, looking for a canopy where you punch that thing through canopy. And once I learned all that and got better and better and better, then I started winning tournaments back on Rayburn. That was way back, but you went from having no confidence to all of a sudden, that's, if I had my druthers, that's the one thing I'd rather do than anything on the planet is go flip a grass with a jig. I'd throw everything else out of the boat if I could go do that. If every lake had matted hydrilla, that's all I'd do.
There's one thing that's real cool about fishing in the wintertime, and I'd say you can go ahead and start it now. You can start this now, and you can carry this from now until the end of February, 1st of March. One thing that's cool about the wintertime, it eliminates a lot of stuff, technique-wise, okay? So it makes your decisions really simple. Like if you put a jerkbait, a jig, an Alabama rig, a rattle trap, and maybe a chatterbait. Like, you put those 5 rods on the deck of your boat right now, and those are the rods that's all you need until March.
Yeah. The white chatterbait, when that water's that cold, matter of fact, I'm really thinking about fishing that Brandon Belt tournament on Rayburn in January, and I've had trips there in January, and throwing a white chatterbait. I mean, we have conked them in 48 to 50 degree water on a white chatterbait, and I mean, they'll hit it, they'll eat it.
Yeah.
So.
Anybody got any questions? I know you just got here.
I got one thing to add. I kind of come in on the end. You're talking about like fishing limit tournaments out here. In the last 6 years, I took a different approach when I'm fishing tournaments out here. It's just like using, like you said, drop shot, smaller baits in general, just like whatever I would want to fish, just downsize it. And my God, you would not believe the difference.
Well, for anybody behind the camera that doesn't understand, Lake Fork has a slot limit, and what that means is it's 16 to 24 inches. So you can't keep anything between 16 and 24 inches. That's a non-keeper no matter what. So you can only keep one over 24. If you catch one over 24, you only keep one. So 4 of your 5 or 5 of your 5 fish that you weigh in on Lake Fork have to be under 16 inches. So you really are trying to catch as many smaller fish as you can to get those 15 and 3/4, 15 and 7/8 inch fish that weigh the most that they can under that 16 inches. So what he's referring to, what Dave was referring to is, drop shot, small shaky heads, downsizing your spinner bait,
1.0s,
throwing a 1.0 instead of a 2.5, right, on crankbaits.
Throwing a shaky head with a Ultra Vibe speed crawl.
Yeah.
Ultra Vibe, man, that is as bad to the bone
Or
as you can get.
For wintertime like we're talking about, I'll tell you, a finesse jig now.
Yeah.
In the wintertime, a finesse jig. So you get those same creek bends, maybe a little bit shallower creek bends, and instead of throwing a normal 1/2 ounce or 3/4 ounce jig like we throw, get you a little finesse jig that has that smaller skirt, get you a little baby crawfish to put on there, and you'll catch those 2-pounders. And that's basically what you're looking for is 2-pounders. I mean, that's the deal.
So when you're fishing your drop shot,
I'll see y'all
what's
later.
your signal to set the hook or whatever? I mean, how do you...
A drop shot is so unique in the fact that because the bait is buoyant, right? And then your leader from hook to weight varies based off what you're doing, the application. I've won tournaments here before with using a leader literally that long, fishing shallow, all right? And then I've won tournaments here using a 24-inch leader out maybe in January, fishing 35 foot of water. And so it depends on the time of the year and the application. But when you flip that thing or you're throwing, I cast a drop shot a lot, and you won't ever feel thump like you would like a Texas rig worm. all you'll feel is it load up. It just get heavy. And the thing about the drop shot that's so unique is that fish picks it up, he will not let go of it. And you lift up and you put a little pressure on the tip, and if that thing moves back, then you just lean into it. My tournament partner on Rayburn,
Do you do it like that even when you're throwing like the weedless rig version? Because I know you use like
I use all weedless. I'll use that offset, a Gamakatsu. Number 2 is what I use. I have number
like
1's and number 2.
hook,
It's an
right?
EWG, and I'll make it weedless because we have so much wood here, so much junk down there to drag it through.
My question is, you're doing the pull into it hook set even on a weedless rig EWG hook?
And I don't have any problem with hooks, with getting them hooked.
Okay.
But I'll just lean into it. What you can't do is, like Phil, my partner on Rayburn, is that he used to never throw a drop shot until recently, in the last year or two. And God dog it, we've done really well down there, won some tournaments. But he is this guy that when he swings on a hook set, the rod whistles. Whoo, like that, and here he's breaking off on everything. Phil, dude, you can't do that, man. Lean there. And it took him a long time to learn. Just turn his body and just lean into it. And he said, and the fish will be on there. It took him a while. He had to separate his devices whenever he's fishing a drop shot, fishing a Texas rig, fishing a jig, or whatever the case.
Or like crankbait.
In the power he uses when he leans into it.
For today, about the 4th time I fished a drop shot, and I was over on Welch, and I threw the line out, and current sort of flowing.
Right.
And I was just barely bumping it in, and all of a sudden I saw the line start moving in the water, and I started.
You didn't
pulling.
feel it.
I didn't even feel it, and I started pulling back, and then I was like, "Oh, he has it!" And I
Yeah.
set the hook, and it pulled out.
Yeah, and I mean that's what that thing does. I mean there's a lot of times, and the hardest bite on a drop shot, especially when we're fishing wood here, is that you'll pull it by a stump, and then all of a sudden the line you lift it up and the line's slack. You reel up, he'll hit it and he'll swim straight at you, and those are the ones that'll paralyze you. And I caught one time in a tournament here. I flipped up by a stump and I lifted up. And I lifted up again. The 3rd time I lifted up and I didn't feel anything, I just reeled up and swung on it. I mean, I just set the hook on air, thinking that's odd, that thing, I can't feel that weight. And I'm using a 3/8 ounce weight. And by the time that I'm flipping it literally from here to that wall over there on a big stump. When I stuck that fish, he was right there where Landy is, right there, and right at the boat. And by the time we netted it, weighed 1161.
Wow.
1161.
Well, I'm also using a spinning rod, and I've never used a spinning rod before, so
Yeah.
maybe I should.
How awkward does that feel?
Yeah.
That's why I don't use them, dude. I'm gonna tell you. Listen, I don't.
Maybe I should do my bait caster with.
Well,
the
the
drop
bait
shot.
caster, but here's the thing.
You're right, bait casting
and I
rod,
did
you can.
I did a video
Yeah.
with him over.
We both use a bait casting rod.
And I use a bait caster for drop shots for one specific reason. I'm way more accurate if I'm target fishing, whether I'm pitching to a stump, pitching to a certain target, bedfish. It don't matter what it is. But I mean, but I also use something that's necessary. You can't just tie. Say you're using 12-pound line on a 6 to 12 line rated rod. If you run 12-pound line down straight to the hook, tie the hook, and then tie the weight, within an hour, no more than 2 hours, the line's going to start wrapping around the tip of your rod. Because the thing helicopters down a lot of times. That's why I use teardrop weights. Because teardrops, I've learned over time, are not as bad as cylindrical weight, which is a nightmare. But I use a 35-pound Spro swivel, all right? And I'll tie it, tie the main line, which is mono. And I use mono for a very good reason. Like in the case of the 11-pounder. I mean, he was sawing on that drag so hard that I need the line stretch.
Extra stretch, yeah.
I need the stretch because you have to have the rod match perfectly to it. The rod I'm using is a 6 to 12 line rated rod.
For
which
the
is
rod,
critical.
For the rod deal, we actually we came up I came up with my line of rods earlier this year. So we have one that's for throwing a drop shot. It's for throwing a wacky worm. It's for that exact stuff, and it is. I mean, you can bend that rod all the way around if you need to, and it's a 6'9" medium, and it's actually, if you want to go check it out, it's right downstairs. They have one, but it's 6'9" medium, and I think you throw about the same size rod on yours.
Well, I've got two that I use. I use a lot of Okuma stuff, and it's a 7 foot. Most all the stuff I like is 7 foot. Now I do have some 6'6" that I'll use occasionally if I'm flipping to docks. And then I'll use a little bit shorter rod to do that, especially on a shaky head or whatever. But I'll use. We've catch so many fish off docks with a drop shot. It's insane.
That's kind of why I went with 6'9" on that one. It's like
Yeah.
that in between, right? Like you still got the length of this close to the 7 foot, but you've got the shortness it does. It's kind of like the best of both worlds on them two he's talking about.
Yeah, and I take clients out, I mean, if they're pre-fishing for a tournament here, like McDonald's or like the Berkeley or whatever, and then most of the time I want to know, what are you after here? You want a stage walker, a fish that's going to get them to be able to bring it up to the stage and walk across, or are you looking to win the tournament? And I mean, you'll have to have two different strategies with that. Almost 100% of the people I take out for those, they're just looking for money fish. They just want to catch some money fish.
It's so funny.
And the more money fish they can catch and walk across that stage, I mean, the happier they are. And so that's why I spend an extraordinary amount of time looking for those 2.5 pounders during September, October.
It's just funny that you say that with us always talking about how I fish. We fish so different, and your customers come with you and they're looking for keepers under 16 inches that they can go weigh in. And man, the last big tournament we had for hourly deal was in October, the Berkeley tournament. And everybody I had that week, I was actually on some really good unders. And I'm all excited because they're like, yeah, we're pre-fishing for Berkeley. I mean, yeah, check this out, dude. Here, watch this. First fish we're going to catch is going to be about 2 pounds. Watch this, dude. Yeah, awesome. And they're like, well, where can I catch it over?
Yeah.
That's all. When they come with me, all they're interested in is where can I catch a big one.
And I had a client, one of my clients from Monroe, Louisiana, and he came down and he says, I'm coming to fish this tournament. I ain't going to do nothing but fish for an over. I said, might be a mistake, but here's my opinion. This is what I'm going to say. I mean, I wouldn't get too attached to that. But so he had jig tied on. He had a big worm. He had a DD22 or a 10XD. He fished for 3 days in that event. He called me. I hate this lake. He did not get a bite. Did not get a single bite in 3 days.
What's funny is we actually caught an over
trying to swing for the fence.
We caught an over or two leading up to that tournament and caught several that were close to overs leading up to that tournament, and what we caught them on was 1/4 and 1/8 ounce.
I was going to say, it's more finesse.
Like little stuff. I mean, that was the funny part about them guys asking me, where do you catch an over? And I'm on these 2 pound fish, and I'm like, well, you just the next up. Like, it might be there. Like, on this same stretch that I'm catching 2 pounds on, we've caught a 9 pounder and an 8 pounder, and so it can happen that way. I do want to go back a little bit and talk about that hook set deal on that drop shot a little more, because there is something, I fish a chatterbait a lot. Everybody knows that probably that watch my stuff. And I fish it because I fish it in grass a lot in East Texas. I fish it on very overpowered gear. A lot of guys on tour fishing in different areas across the country like to throw a chatterbait on kind of a whippy rod, a bendy rod, a glass rod, a cranking rod or something like that a lot of times. I don't, man. I throw it on a big, heavier. I throw mine on a 7.6 medium heavy, and it's pretty stout. And I throw it on, if I'm throwing it on fluorocarbon, it's on 20-pound fluorocarbon. A lot of times I'll throw it on 30-pound braid because it makes it to where I can get this little subtle jerk out of the grass really easy with that heavier powered gear, and that's what gets my bites. And I got to get them to bite it before I can miss them, right? Like, that's the deal. Like, I need as many swings as I can. I'll miss some, but actually I've gotten it to where I don't miss any. But the thing is, the reason guys fish a real bendy rod on chatterbait is because on a chatterbait in particular, for whatever reason, okay, they just load on it. They don't really.
Right.
I mean, sometimes they will, but for the most part, it's just kind of a pull similar to the drop shot in that way, right? So that's why a lot of guys fish those bendier rods, is to absorb that. And, if they jerk on it, that bendier rod gives them that hook set absorption. But I think even when you jerk on a chatterbait, you miss a lot of fish, even with a whippier rod. I'm going to tell you why. That blade on the front of it, okay, as it's trying to exit a fish's mouth, can act as a shield to the hook. And I think that's why pulling into a chatterbait fish will land you and hook you a lot more fish. So I have a lot of experience with trying to teach customers that are power fishermen now. These guys are power fishermen, and so they get a bite on that chatterbait. They think once they want to, do all this. I'm like, no. You can't do that. And so here's the thing that I always tell people that seems to help a lot. You can pull on that fish as hard as you want to. You do the same thing with a drop shot. I'm sure David will back up. You can pull on that fish as hard as you want to. And in fact, I need you to pull on him hard. I need you to keep the bend in that rod, and I need you to keep that line tight. So pull on him as hard as you want to. Never jerk. There should never be, when you're setting a hook on a drop shot, when you're setting a hook on a crankbait, or pretty much any kind, I think, and when you're setting a hook on a chatterbait, there should never be a moment where you snap that rod. It should be pull and then start reeling, and really set the hook more with your reel than anything else. But same thing like with your drop shot, if you'd have just kept pulling and then started really reeling, you'd have had that fish all the way to the boat. And it's the same deal on drop shot, crankbait, and a chatterbait. It's all the same.
You can go to your Lake Fork guide and a year ago, he and I shot a video about that exact topic.
Yeah.
That exact topic.
Oh
Now,
yeah, we did talk about that.
We
didn't
did. Remember, we pulled
I
about
did-
that stump.
And
You
I did
titled
the
us-
I did the line trick thing.
But as far as with a drop shot, too many people make the mistake with a drop shot of using too heavy a rod for that application. They want to go down, even if they're using 17-pound line. I know some guys.
That's what I see people do, Dave. Because so that's a good thing. I want to ask you this. So I see people, because they're throwing a heavier drop shot. Let's say they're throwing a 3/8 or half-ounce weight. They're throwing a 2/0 or 3/0 EWG hook and a 7-inch trick worm, and they've got 17-pound line. They feel like because they got 17-pound line and a bigger hook and all that they can fish it like a Texas rig and jerk on and set the hook.
You won't get nearly as many bites. And great story to go along with this. He and I shot video last year in October and on 2 different lakes. And I didn't tell him I was going to do this, but we did a little test on line size. And so I was using a light line. He was throwing a jig. He was throwing some 17-pound line.
The first day I was throwing a jig. The second trip I was throwing a shaky head, but I was throwing 17-pound.
But he was still throwing
line.
17-pound line. So I was using 8 to 10-pound line on this trip. Well, what I learned was really amazing from this because I wanted to compare. We both, in 2 days, fishing these 2 lakes, had the same amount of bites. He caught all big fish, all the bigger fish, and a lot of the fish that I caught during that trip, I lost some of them at the boat. I broke off on some of them, but they weren't big fish as far as that goes. What I took away from this 2 days was we were fishing 2 lakes that you could not see any deeper than this.
Yeah.
10 inches maybe, all right? What I ascertained from that,
That first lake was real dirty.
was that the lakes were real dirty, that line size did not make a difference on that application. Now, if we would have went to a lake like Athens, where you can see sometimes down 7-8 foot when the water clarity, then he can throw that 17-pound line. I'll use that 8-pound line. I will smoke a hole all through him.
I think you got
on
to
that
throw
light
a
line.
little caveat on that too, because like wind matters on
Yes.
those clear lakes. So
Yes,
like
yes.
if we're on a Athens, or just if we're in West Texas in a lake that's got 20 foot of visibility, it's even more so there. But if there's little to no wind, then the line size becomes such a huge factor. I mean, it's the predominant factor is the size of your gear. Fishing more finesse, having lighter line becomes such a big deal. But even on those clear water lakes now, when the wind blows, man, I can throw a swim bait on 17-pound line.
Yes.
And I'm fine because now I'm throwing a winding bait and it's the wind's when that wind blows, you got to think about it like this. Where's the bass's eyes, guys? It's on top of his head. His eyes ain't over here. His eyes are up here. So where's he looking 90% of the time? Unless he does this, like he's looking up. Well, when you got wind ripping the top of the surface, right, rippling the water, well, that's going to distort what that fish sees.
Diffused.
It's going to distort what he's seeing. And so even on clear water lakes, if the wind's blowing, you can get away with bigger line on stuff. But if it's calm and it's clear, that line size is...
And when I'm fishing this stuff here, even this past year, during April, we were flipping a drop shot. I was using an 8 to 17 line rated rod, and we were throwing 15-pound line, all right? And we were catching it up to 10 pounds on that rig. But the trick was that the water it wasn't 3 foot clear. You couldn't see 3-4 foot. You could only see this far down during the spring, and so it was no problems. We were catching those fish in 4 to 8 foot of water during April. And so that rig, I mean, we caught a lot of 7 and 8 pounders on that rig alone during that time of the year, so I didn't need to throw that lighter rig based off that condition. So what I've learned over time was I can modify based off of the application I'm throwing, whether it's boat docks, what it is, what the size of the fish that I'm actually involved in catching. And if we're around a lot of bigger fish and that water's not exactly super clear, then I'm going to go a little bit heavier rig.
I would say in general, when you're trying to decide on line size, my take on it would be this. Because I think there's times even in some more stained water that line size can make a difference, because line size can actually affect the action on the bait. Especially the lighter the bait is, the lighter weight the bait is, you've got to marry up, match your line size to your technique is important. But the general rule is going to be this, right? The better the fish are biting, the less the line size matters. You can go bigger. But when it's tough, the tougher it is, a lot of times the more finesse you're going to need to go and the more light line you're going to need to go, because it's going to give your bait a more subtle action. Even if say it's a jerk bait, right, does all this. Well, lighter line is going to make that jerk bait have more subtle or erratic action. Then heavier line is going to kind of pull that jerk bait more on that technique, and especially on something like Davis on a drop shot, a shaky head, a Texas rig, a jig. All those things, the line size can make little subtle differences that when the fish are biting good don't matter. Those subtle differences, that jerk bait going like this or going like this, when they're chewing a jerk bait, it don't matter. Just keep twitching it. They'll bite it in a minute, you know? Like it doesn't. But when it gets tough and that fish just wants to sit there with his eyes crossed and his mouth closed staring at it, he don't really want to bite, that little subtle thing to the side might be what makes him bite versus this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's, just general rule, the tougher the fishing is, the more important it is to think about going lighter on your line on every technique.
And
really.
smaller on the baits.
Smaller on the baits?
Smaller on the baits and lighter on the line. I mean, that's my theory. That's because I fish a lot of tournaments. I'm a tournament junkie. And I'll use the lightest line that I can use per the application. So you got to figure that also. So I don't necessarily want to throw a chatterbait on a 12-pound line. No. A moving bait, I probably won't use anything less than 15. 17 is the preferred on most any, especially if the water's not super clear.
Except for a diving crankbait and a diving jerk
Exactly.
bait. There is time. There's a case for lighter line.
If I'm using a square bill, a lot of times I'll throw a 12-pound line on a square bill. But I mean, it depends on what I'm throwing it at and whatnot.
There's so many factors in all those decisions, right? Like, out here on Fork, I'm probably never going to throw lighter than 15-pound line on a crankbait. On other lakes, I'll throw 10-pound line on a deep diving crankbait, if I need to. But that's a hard thing to dial it down and go, this is what you do for this, this is what you do for this, and this. There's all those puzzle pieces.
Yeah. But anyway, I got one interesting story to tell you before we go, and this has to do with line size because I used to fish a lot of stringer tournaments here. I was allowed to many years ago, and the partner that I was fishing with, we were rigging rods up in his driveway, and I rigged up a drop shot rod with 10-pound line, and with 12-pound line. I had one with 8-pound line. Well, he's sitting over there, and he uses spinner rods. Well, he rigged one up with 6-pound line. I didn't think twice about it. Get the tournament the next day, and it's tough. It's January. That's a tough time of the year to catch unders. Might be the toughest time of the year to catch an under is January. Well, they used to have 3 tournaments in January. I loved it. Well, I had these areas that we were fishing really, really deep, and I'm thinking, man, if we can just catch 2 or 3 fish, we might have a chance to win. Well, we pull up in this spot, and he's bowed up in the back, man. I'm getting a net, man. You swear I'm going to net a 12-pounder here. He pulls one in about that big. I net it, man. I'm happy as a lark. Put him in a live well. Next thing I know, he's bowed up again. And I'm like, God dog it, man, this is great. You net it, put him in a live well. 2 minutes later, he's got another one. And I'm thinking, golly, look at this. Well, long story short, he's got 7. I ain't caught a fish yet. All right, and I'm dancing a jig on the front of the boat, thinking, man, we're gonna do well.
On tournament day, it don't matter who catches them.
And I'm in the boat. True, but then I got to thinking, I'm on the trolling motor. I'm thinking, I looked around and says, did you put that 6-pound line on that rod? He said, yeah. And I was like, come here and run this trolling motor. I took that rod and I went back there and I took the leader, the 8-pound leader off, and I made me up a 6-pound leader. And I said, all right. So I went back up around the front of the boat. In the next hour, we were tied 7-7. True story. We won the tournament.
In the meantime, I've never bought 6-pound line in my life.
I went from 8 to 6-pound line, and all of a sudden we're tied 7-7. You mean? But here's the trick. Like you said a while ago, we were using 4-inch worms.
That day it made a difference.
And that might have been enough to give that thing the right action because of the fact that it's such a small bait, and that light line and that small hook, And I was like, I'll be and we won that tournament easily that day.
They work together and
They
worm
do.
is able to float and do what it needed to do.
You got to get the line and the bait matched up, man. That's really important, and that's why every time you hear a technique video on YouTube or whatever else, like guys always mention line size or a range of line size that they use because it is a very big deal to not overpower your bait. That's a very big deal. Anybody got any questions? Any more questions before we get out of here?
When y'all were talking about drop shotting on a bait caster,
Mm-hmm.
you You say you have a rod that's medium action?
It's
I have a 6.9. Mine's just labeled 6.9 medium, but David likes to get all into the numbers. And
go by the
details.
numbers because a medium has a big variable to it. I mean, a medium, and I've seen rods that are mediums that are a 10 to 20.
That is
line
true,
rated rod.
right? Like
10
brand
to
to
20,
brand. Yeah.
brand to brand, they're 10 to 20. But if
change.
you go by the number on there, it'll say line weight. And every one that I use for a drop shot, when I'm using 12-pound line, says 6 to 12 line rating on it.
Yeah.
I actually have a 4 to a 10 line rated rod that I use for 6 and 8-pound test line, right? But I only strictly use it
think-
for that.
So ours,
And it says it right on the rod.
so the rod that we made for that is a it's an 8
To 14.
to 14 or 15.
Yeah. And the rods that I use for my customers that Okuma makes is an 8 to 14
Yeah.
line rated rod, and it is about as high as I'll go with that, and it works really perfectly.
It's really, I mean, you could probably throw 6-pound line and maybe not break off too much, but I've really never have owned 6-pound. I really don't ever, honestly, being in East Texas, I don't really ever go below 10. Is about the lowest I'll go. But yes, it is rated in that range, and it's built for smaller baits, lighter baits. It's built for that, 10 to 12-pound line, 15 at the most, like it's built for that.
But
And it's-
here's the thing too with that is the hook, all right? And when you're using a rod like that, then I use a number 2 Gamakatsu offset. I've got 4s also, and I've got 1s.
distinguish that before you go any further, because there is a difference between a number 2 and a 2-aught.
No, a number 2, a number 2 is
Because
really small.
most people just think of those EWG hooks as 1-aught, 2-aught, 3-aught, 4-aught, 5-aught. There's a difference between a 2-aught and a number 2.
Right,
Big
yeah, and they're in an EWG, it has a 4, then a 2, then a 1, then a 1-aught, and a 2-aught. The aughts get bigger and bigger as you go. Well, I like to use that 2 because of the fact that I'm trying to get the bites, all right? So
It's a very thin wire,
tournament,
right?
it's a thin wire hook, and my tournament partner I was fishing with here for a couple of years, he would use a 2-aught hook on there because he didn't want to, a lot of times he'll catch an over and he didn't want to lose that fish. I've landed plenty of them on there, but you have to have your drag set perfectly, right? So that if you do hook a 7, 8, 9, 10 pounder, that line is going to go ahead and peel off there and you can grab it, start pulling it, But what'll end up happening with that is with that light wire hook, if that drag's a little bit too tight or if you lean on it, I've had them before break the hook. Straighten the hook before, and that's one of the reasons why he wanted to avoid that. But at the end of the day, I always got more bites than he did. Always.
But a rod is going to have a lot to do with that too. Having the right rod having the right rod is really important on some techniques and not really that important on other techniques.
Yeah.
Like I can throw a frog and be just as effective with several different rods, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah,
You know
I use
what
a 12. I use a 12 to 25.
But
on the frog.
if I'm but what I mean, like I can have like a 7-foot heavy,
Yeah.
or I can have a 7.6 medium heavy, or I can have a 7.4 extra heavy. I can get it done with a frog on all of those.
Yeah.
But on anything that I'm dragging slow, right? Jig, Texas rig, drop shot, shaky head, any of that type of stuff, Carolina rig even. Number one, I want to have a nice rod that maybe is going to be a little more expensive, so I have the sensitivity. Because there's so many bites that you don't feel if you don't have a higher end rod. That's the reality of it. Number two is you want to make sure that you have the perfect amount of hook set power combined with the tip you need. And on a drop shot, you need obviously a lot more tip than you do on a Texas rig or a jig. So when we, I hand-picked every one of these rods, their powers, their the bend in the tip of them. I tried to get every one of them exactly the way I wanted. And so that is going to have a big factor on your landing ratio for each technique.
Yeah, you were
It
asking
really is.
about the drop shot rod because if you use too heavy a rod with one of those light hooks like that,
You bow the hook out.
you'll open the hook
Soon,
up,
as soon
you'll
as the
break the
fish
hook off.
pulls, you'll bow the hook out. You have
Granted, you'll get more bites, but it's dangerous.
And then on the other hand, if you take that drop shot rod and you try to throw a Texas rig on it, and you've got 50 foot of line out, you're never going to set that hook. You're never going to drive that hook in that fish very well. So it's always important.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're in the drop shot and you're looking for a drop shot rod, I would encourage you to look at that one. I mean, I'm not telling you to buy it. There's a bunch of good rods on the market, but we're proud of these. They're all American made. The blanks have been made in America. So if you're a patriotic guy, you can stand behind it on that aspect of it. And they're built right here at Lake Fork, and they are. We priced them at $265. But I'm telling you, man, I've literally put them next to NRXs, and they are.
And he
I mean,
really
they are
he
good.
really needs to let go of one of those so I can test it for about 5 years.
For about 5 years.
For about 5. I need to really
See
work
the bar
on
till
it.
all the paint's off of it, and you have it
I
back.
need to work on it. So,
Yeah.
so
Once I get all the paint off of it, I got to test the next generation after that. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
My drop shots, I don't even set the hook. I do a real set.
yeah,
And
you
we
just
That's what we talked about earlier, yeah.
That's all I do.
Yeah.
And it's so funny we're talking about this. You're talking about your jig, how you learned how to fish a jig. You took everything out of
Yeah.
the boat, only did that. That's how I did with
It's
the
the way
drop
to do
shot.
it, man.
Because I was up there, I was stationed up there in upstate New York. That water is no joke. Like when they say it's gin clear, it is gin clear. You can see down 20 plus foot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd see all these big bass swimming, and I didn't believe the line, the line size of it. I was like, dude, there's no way that matters. And I'd
It
see
matters.
these big fish swimming, and they wouldn't even like sniff my bait. They wouldn't even get near it. I'm like, dadgum. And so I was like, finally, I was like, screw this. Spinning rod. I got 6-pound test and went to. I think they had a Gator Mountain up there, and I didn't know jack about it, but all I know is that everybody always throws Morning Dawn. So I was like,
I use that
can
a
you buy
lot.
me some Morning Dawn worm.
God, I
found
use that a
some and
lot.
Put it on there.
Yeah.
The
Aaron
rest is
Martin's.
history.
If Aaron Martin's designed the killer,
And
I think I'm
telling you,
in.
and that guy's got a ton of good videos on YouTube, and that's after I kind of picked it up. I started watching Aaron Martin videos, and
Morning
that's
Dawn Red
really-
Flake.
Yeah, and
The only thing-
it works from Texas. I've in some pretty stained water out here on Lake Fork. I've caught them on that.
Yep.
Morning
Oh
Dawn
yeah.
color.
Oh yeah.
No doubt.
It's,
One thing that
yeah.
the one thing that I don't know a whole lot about drop shot fishing. Honestly, I really don't. I mean, I do know some because I used to before I got it. I fished tournaments, and you have to fish a drop shot. But the one thing that I would say, just as an overall tip for a drop shot fisherman that I can give, is you're fishing it too fast. I don't care how slow you're fishing it. You're probably fishing it too fast.
Yeah.
And you see guys with a drop shot, they want to shake the rod and like let that bait shake a bunch with the weight anchoring it down. No, they just hold it. Like when you're throwing 10-pound line, when you're throwing that little bitty thin wire hook like David's talking about, and you've got a little finesse straight tail worm, everybody's hand has a vibration or tremor to it, right? Like nobody has a perfectly steady hand. Some of us worse than others. But anyway, if you'll just hold that thing, like literally when that drop shot's out there and you're just holding it still, not reeling it in, you're just holding it. There will be enough vibration transmitted through your hand onto that rod to make that worm down in that water go. And so a lot of times, the more subtle the action on the drop shot, the more bite you
I
get.
vary that based off of the bite that day, the clarity of the water. Sometimes we're bouncing it like this. Sometimes we're like doing exactly what he says, barely moving it,
hold.
barely moving it. And we were fishing a tournament. I was fishing somewhere. Matt Reed was there in the area where I was, and we were smoking him on a drop shot. And I think that was down at Falcon. And he said that night he was staying at the same place. He says, "I watch y'all fishing drop shots. Man, you move that rod way more than what we do." And I was like, "That's what they wanted today." And look how many we caught.
Well,
He's like, "I can't
David's
believe
a David's a like next level drop shot fisherman. You know, there's things that I do with a chatterbait, and there's things that I do with a jig that most people just aren't going to do. I do some different tricks and techniques, and some of that stuff David's talking about on the drop shot, jerking it up and down. Most people just don't do that, but David's got a lot of confidence, got a lot of time, and he knows some little things like that about that bait, which is what makes him so good with it. But I do want to throw one more thing out there. We got to say one more thing, and then we need to get going. We've been here for a long time tonight, and I know I'm hungry, and I'm sure the princess is about ready to choke me for talking too long. But to my buddy Zach Watts and all my other Cajun buddies out there that love that purple and gold of LSU football, I wore that shirt just for y'all. I wore that shirt just for y'all. Giggle, Max. Hey, David, man, appreciate
yeah,
it.
man, thank you.
Great
It was
knowledge
fun.
as always. Appreciate you guys coming out tonight. And we'll be back here in 2 weeks. Don't forget, in 2 weeks, we are going to have our big Christmas deal that we do every year where we do the world's biggest YouTube bass fishing tackle giveaway for the 3rd year in a row now. So it's Christmas time. We're going to bring gifts.